out there. Welcome back to another APAC Hybrid Cloud Kopi Hour. And just as a reminder for those who have not joined us before or who are joining us many times, I am August Simonelli. I am a technical marketing manager at Red Hat in the Hybrid Platforms Business Unit. And this is the APAC live stream. Now, I know we call it the Kopi Hour, and for everyone on this call, they know who it is. They know what it is. But I like to put this little reminder up that what Kopi is. It's this wonderful beverage you can get in Singapore. It's not a radio station out of East Omaha or anything like that. KOPI, something like that. So I like to just make sure we all know that. So today we have a super exciting show coming up, but we have our usual co-host. That's Dev Shambag. Dev, why don't you go ahead and say good day?
Hi everyone, glad to be back on another episode of Kopi Hour. My name is Dev Shanbhag, consulting services architect based out of Melbourne. Really excited to share the stage today. We have some international guests from Singapore and our favorite Shane Boulden as well. So happy to be part of this and hear from the experts in terms of security and software supply chain security. So nice to meet you all.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dev. So exactly, Dev, we've got today's show is on securing the hybrid cloud. And as Dev said, we've pulled together some of our best security people in the region. And I'll go ahead and just do some introductions. We'll go alphabetically. So first up is Shane Boulden. Shane, go ahead and say hi.
Hey everyone, it's Shane. This is my first time on the Kopi Hour. So I'm a solution architect in Brisbane in Australia. And I support a lot of kind of security problem sets. How do we pull security into development? How do we secure platforms? And how do we start to move to some of these kind of cloud native security models? So yeah, really excited for today's session.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Shane. Next up, we have, let's see, Franky. Go ahead and say hi, Franky.
Hi, this is Franky Ho. I'm the sales specialist for the cloud and also the application development platform, serving the enterprise customers in Hong Kong, ranging from the strategy framework to technology. I'm very excited to be here and then to meet all the experts.
Awesome. Cool. And last up is Li Ming. Li Ming, say hi.
Hey, hi, everyone. And thanks, August and Dev, for inviting me here, right? I'm Li Ming from Red Hat Singapore. I'm the public sector chief for Singapore government, right? And as part of my day-to-day role, I help government agencies in Singapore transform and really help them to accelerate the adoption of container technology, and security is one of the main topics that I talk about day-to-day. So glad to share my thoughts later on with the white audience, and looking forward to speaking to you all later.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. So as you can see, we have a great group. And so Dev and I were thinking about this show and how we can, it's an obvious topic, security, but it's something that was coming up in our daily lives, right? Especially here in Australia, we went through multiple hacks, right? We've seen a bunch of things going on where, big providers, telcos, healthcare providers are seeing data get leaked. And so it really I got us thinking, how can we deal with this? And I wanted to get you guys on it and tell me a bit about what you're seeing out there. I mean, Shane, you're here in Australia, you're seeing it, but in Taiwan and in Singapore, what are you guys seeing? I mean, are we seeing these big public hacks everywhere?
Yeah, maybe I can start first from Hong Kong perspective. I think it's quite interesting for the phenomenon that I'm observing regarding the customer approaches us talking about cloud security, because we know that it involves so many things here, right? No matter talking about technology, process, culture, or people, just for technology, it can also mean so many things. But one thing I think is quite common for Hong Kong enterprise customer, when they are asking for cloud security, they are looking for turnkey runtime security. Okay, two things here, right?
Yeah.
The runtime security, why they are put so much emphasis is that because they believe 70% of the attacks actually is coming from the application layer. And the other thing is because the application usually is customer facing, and also is the business, care most about that. So then this is the last line of defense or the first line of attack, depends on where is your real point. So this is the second reason why they so care about that. And the third reason is, as we all know, is because it is mission critical, data is sensitive, so it's related to business revenue, related to the reputation of the company, and also last but not least, the customer experience. So this is the reason why. But it doesn't mean that those customers don't know or even don't care about the rest of the security. Talking about, for example, like depth and off, like shift left, like secure software supply chain.
Right.
But apart from runtime security, they will also see, do you have some kind of turnkey solution? I think this is something that we would like to explore more, because we know security is not a simple switch, turn on and turn off, or just a simple set of, hey, Mr. Customer, you need to patch this or patch that. But this is still true, at least in Hong Kong, that kind of so-called the turnkey solution.
So from a public standpoint, are you seeing in Hong Kong big public hacks? I mean, you hear about them around the world. Are you seeing them there? Are they happening? And so it's in the news, companies are looking kind of bad, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it's not that common. Maybe due to Chinese culture. We don't want to let the people know that we are not doing good, perhaps. Because maybe I only heard about once a year, maybe just one or two. It's not common at all. But whenever there's happening in an enterprise customer, when they approach us, we can feel that, right? Because you can feel the anxiety, you can feel the pressure, and they're really looking for that kind of solution. But I think it's not common in Hong Kong.
No. And Ming, what about Singapore? What are we seeing there?
I think that's so true, right? And I think really resonates with what Franky is saying, right? And especially from a Singapore government perspective, right? Cybersecurity has always been at the forefront, right? And it's in the last couple of years, we start even to talk about zero trust, right? Zero trust, ZTA, and sort of how do they look at security from a new perspective, right? And cyber resiliency, cybersecurity has always been in the top of the mind for the Singapore government, at least, right? And the emphasis on that cannot be, there's a lot of emphasis on that because it's really about public services that the government offers to, Singapore, right? To the citizens and to the public, right? It's a public good services, right? And cyber attacks, cybersecurity, if anything goes wrong, it's not good at all, right? I mean, these can go down, things like that, right? It's just bad press.
And people lose access to Kopi, right? We don't want that happening, right?
Exactly.
So Shane, in Australia, I mean, it goes right onto the headlines. It's the top story. I don't know if you want to share a few. I mean, we've lived through it quite personally here. Tell me a bit about it.
Yeah, it almost feels like there's a new incident in the news every week at the moment. We've seen, large-scale data exfiltration that impacts Australians and their identity. We've seen kind of supply chain compromise locally. And even just yesterday, there was a report from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre they released on kind of some really complex malware targeting Australian organisations. So, malware that's kind of, prolific throughout environments. It's really difficult to detect, obfuscating network communications inside the organization. So there are some really complex threats targeting Australian organizations, I think, that we've seen.
Yeah. So that's interesting, right? And Dev, you're here with me in Australia. You're seeing it every day. You're seeing it on customer sites. They're probably concerned about it. They're probably asking us what we're doing about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it from the last few years point of view, I think the rise in incidents of cybersecurity attacks has increased significantly, and that has changed the conversation from a customer point of view, wherein they initially want to discuss security first in any solution that we discuss with them, and that's been quite significant. Initially, before the pandemic, it was more about how do we bring optimization or cost. But these days, the first thing and the priority from our customers is how do we make sure everything is secure, whether it's data at rest, data in transit, and these are some of the things that kind of align to what Franky and Shane and Lee kind of mentioned, right? The government's thinking about it organizations thinking about it. And it's really at the forefront of all the discussions that we have from a field point of view.
Right. So that's a great segue, and I'm sure we could have a conversation about this the whole show, but we need to center around something. So what we mentioned is talking about this report that was done. So this is the State of Kubernetes Security report from 2023. I'll put the link in the chat so it's there, and you find that here. I'll leave that up. So I wanted to just go through some of this and explain what this is and give us a place to sort of launch into some cool stuff we can chat with our guests today about how they're dealing with this with customers, and then even have a demo and such. So basically what this report is, it's been running when we with StackRox, and now Red Hat has taken on StackRox. So it's the 3rd edition. This year, they surveyed over 600 DevOps and security leaders. Last year was 300. So it's growing. And we've got respondents across all different fields and enterprises. Now, the report it's not that long. It came out mid-April, and it's 20 or 30 pages. So I've just pulled a few interesting things out that I thought we could kind of look at from the blog that's written, and you just fill out your details and you get it. So it's pretty cool. So here's some of the notable findings that are worth kind of calling out. So it's 38% of respondents state that security investment in containerized operations is inadequate, right? And that's going up. And 67% of those respondents have had to slow down what they're doing to adopt and address these security concerns. So that's, I think, very interesting when you think about what you guys were saying and what you're seeing out there, right? That it reflects those numbers. But looking a little bit more into just a few things that are out there that are standing out as far as why this is a problem, and I kind of want to talk more about with you guys, is that the investment doesn't match the adoption. So what's happening is all this complexity is making it very hard for customers to actually catch up and to actually secure this stuff. And I'm curious for some comments on that, Shane. I know you probably have some thoughts on a slide like this.
I think we've started to see organizations start to adopt some of these cloud native security models, and I think one of the things they've really learned from that is that high friction security doesn't work. So if you have these kind of processes where developers have to go through kind of multiple security gates in order to get something into production, it takes a long time to go through those gates, they're going to work around that. I've certainly found developers are like water. They'll find the path of least resistance into production. And if we've got kind of high friction security gates on the way, they're going to work around it. So I think one of the kind of key learnings here is how do we bake in security into those processes in a way that it's easy to consume, and it almost feels like it's transparent to that process of getting code from development into cloud native platforms and into production.
Yeah. That's interesting, Dev, because that makes me think of our last show when the guys were talking about, migrating and extending clouds, multi-cloud. It needs to be part of the process. It can't be something you do, right? You look at this first statistic that says 38% aren't taking security seriously or investing in it adequately. It shouldn't be an issue, right? That it should just be part of the process.
I like how Shane defined it, that developers are like water and they'll find their way around it. And it kind of aligns in terms of how organizations want to move to the new ways of working, i.e., cloud native. But again, I think in terms of all this process, the difficulties and the challenges that developers face, I guess a lot of it has to be simplified from a product point of view. And I'm really interested to hear, our experts, and their thoughts on this.
Yeah, I was going to say, Franky, I wanted you to see this one, but yes, please comment.
Yeah, I just want to add a comment here, guys. Because it's talking about the Kubernetes security, customer they have some kind of knowledge regarding for the cloud security as a whole, but down to Kubernetes container, they have still a concern whether the existing security policy, that kind of governance and control is enough or not. So the simple question is, are we really secure when using Kubernetes. So this is caused some kind of frustration. And I have a real customer here in Hong Kong, yes, because this is a normal process, Shane talking about. It's definitely, no matter what kind of technologies, when you need to put into production, whatever you have an application sort of thing, you still need to pass the security gates. But due to the Kubernetes, the infrastructure operation team may not understand well the standard from the security team regarding Kubernetes. So that's the reason that caused some kind of the project delay and then slow down of the business to a certain bit of that. I think this is one of the example here.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just add on a little bit. I think a lot of customers today, at least from my perspective, is that where is the middle ground? Right? Where is the middle ground, and what is just enough, or what is good enough from a security standpoint or security perspective, right? Because a lot of them come from a very traditional way of looking at security, whether it's EDRs, whether it's SIEM, whether it's antivirus, right? But as they start to adopt more cloud native or container technology, that's where a lot of times, a lot of customers struggle today, because in the cloud native world, whether it's Kubernetes, whether it's what other technologies, what is a better way? What is a more, I would say, more appropriate way to secure their systems, right? And that's where people like me or even Franky or Shane, will talk to customers, right, to help them to look at these new technologies, look at better ways to secure their systems, right? And I think that's where I find a lot of time, exactly like 38%, right? Whether they're not taking security seriously, or they just don't know enough, or what is, what's the state of art today, right? What is the state of art from what they're doing for virtual machines or bare metal or traditional may not be enough today anymore, right?
Yeah, and I like what you said there. They may not know, and that's why I think Shane's point about it and needing to just be part of the process is so important. It can't be something that they don't know. It just should be, because, and I've teased this slide already, I like this slide, there's massive consequences, right? I mean, look at this. The one that really stuck out here was employee termination, right? So in the past 12 months, have you experienced any of the following impacts to your business as a result of containers, Kubernetes security, or compliance incidents or issues or incidents? Employee termination. I mean, there's serious consequences if we get this wrong. It is highly complex systems, and there's, I've got the report here, and it's straight from that, and it's very, very scary that can be the result.
And I think it's really easy to get caught up in the wrong kinds of security workflows that aren't kind of providing value into those processes. And I think one that we see really commonly is kind of fixating on vulnerabilities and CVEs and trying to achieve like 0 CVE in production. Yeah. And I think we find that doesn't work, because it's a very intensive process trying to pull out all of the CVEs from those workloads, and it's not focusing on those that are important to the organization. And I think what we've seen certainly from Red Hat is that those critical CVEs are the ones that are being targeted in the wild. So they're appearing on the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. They're the ones that are getting turned around into scanning tools in a number of hours. Like, I think that is kind of high value security workflows that need to be incorporated.
Well, and to add to that, right? So you talk about they have to be incorporated. Who needs to do it? So this next one that I pulled out, which is kind of a fun one, is how people see whose responsibility it is, right? And it's a funny spread when you look at this. So whose job is security? So these are DevOps teams. And one thing the report did talk about is that DevOps and DevSecOps and all is very real, and it's happening, and grab the report, but the numbers are looking good. Yet we still have results like this, right? So what team is responsible? It's them, it's over there, it's those folks. That's a problem, right? So only 28% are seeing as the security team handling it, but some thinks it's DevOps. So again, this goes back to our point here that it can't just be a thing that happens over here. It needs to be part of process.
I mean, the way I look at it should be left, right, center. Everyone's responsible for, right? Everybody needs to be mindful of what security is really about to your specific domain, or whether you're an infra guy, whether you're a network guy, whether you're a developer or you're a DevOps engineer, right? Security should never be an afterthought, right? And I think, August, your earlier slide about project delay, it's also an important thing for, at least for customers to think about, is that, if security is an afterthought, that means it's bolted on, it should always be considered, up front, right, as part of the process.
I know I think about when I was a sysadmin, and I mean, let's not talk about when it was, but it very much was, I mean, we were trying to be DevOpsy and all that kind of stuff, but it was very much the teams you didn't mess with were security, didn't understand it, they were annoying and in the way, and networking, and they were always broken and causing all the problems. And that is, obviously, this isn't a conversation about DevOps and all that, but that's still kind of a mentality that's going on, especially with security, is that it hasn't fully become that. And so I think it's great that, we're seeing that change. I think it's helpful, right? Now,
I think we're starting to see that, creating those environments that support security baked into all of those processes, creating guardrails on platforms so that it's more difficult to get outside of that kind of security boundary. So, I think it's really positive to see how teams are kind of supporting each other now to bring security into those workflows.
Yeah. And speaking of that, so is it too hard, right? I look at software supply chain, and there's so many things that have to be secured. So you say we bring it into these workflows, we make it part of the process. We have the guardrails. Developers need to. Ming says everyone's got responsibility, but look at this, man. I mean, look at all the different areas that have to be secured and thought about, and how to make it work. And what's even crazy here is that when people hit issues, like they hit like all the issues. So are things making progress? Is it a losing battle? I mean, of course it's not, but like Franky, when you see something like this, how do your customers feel? How do they feel about their software supply chains? How do they feel about securing all these pieces?
Yeah, I think it's true. Yeah, they would like to cover every, security standpoint, perhaps just like Shane mentioned about the security workflow, and everyone also understand what the meaning of everyone is responsible for security. But the reality, I think, is it's still working in silo. Okay, just like when you're talking about DevOps or even DevSecOps, the first thing is not about the technology. It's talking about whether we can create a collaborative environment, and then we align with the goal that we are trying to meet in here, talking about the security, what we would like to achieve, and then how we are going to achieve. Then we can kickstart trying to explore how technology can help, no matter like using the practices just like KSPM, the Kubernetes security practice, the security posture management, or using some kind of tools for all the SCA, SAST, DST kind of thing. This is, I think, still the reality. And another thing, I think, is always still true, just like the DevOps teams, or in here, maybe we use DevOps teams here. It's one quite funny thing customer would like to ask us, from our experience, what is that team, the DevOps teams or SecOps team, should be under with, right? Because we know that, it should be coming from different teams joining together, forming a new team. But the reality, don't go that way. It won't work, because we don't have that kind of luxury, that kind of budget. It must be somehow we gather people from the team, maybe full-time, maybe part-time, and then it must be report to one of the existing functional unit, the head of functional unit. So giving me some hints. Should it be under infrastructure team, operation team, or the release management team?
Right. Wow. Yeah. So you can see how this can get complex. And then when you think about the ways that things need to be protected, and this is my last slide from here, where we're looking at what are the top security concerns that these various people who are being pulled in and thought about are dealing with. I don't think there's anything too surprising here, but it's kind of a nice split. But vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, right? So vulnerabilities, like you talked about, Shannon, CVEs, misconfigurations is interesting to me, right? An attack, fine, failing compliance, whatever, but misconfigurations. So that I find that fascinating.
That's one. I think, that's one thing that I want to hear from our experts as well. I mean, when I saw this slide, it kind of brought back some of the memories in terms of, a particular, role-based access control is not addressed correctly, and would that constitute as misconfiguration? A code in an application not developed properly, would that constitute a misconfiguration? How do we define this? How can it lead to a security vulnerability is what I want to really hear from.
I think when you look at misconfiguration, right, and people tend to underestimate that what issues can misconfiguration causes, right? Because a lot of times when we talk about security, it's all about CVE, it's about vulnerabilities, it's about compliance, right? But when you look at Kubernetes or containers, platform in general, right, the configuration of the platform or even configuration of the application, I think that's important, right? And then how do you then use tools and technologies like admission controller, for instance, right, in Kubernetes, to make sure that whatever you deploy on it, right, is actually configured correctly, right? And it's kind of surprising that some of the customers are not using those tools, whether it's the OPA, the gatekeeper, or the Covino, right, of the world, right, to make sure that all these policies are actually enforced, or even from ACS perspective, which I know Shane is probably going to demo some of this later on. Yeah.
I think this gets really interesting when we start to look at cloud native security, because we've got, I think, a lot more flexibility in what configuration looks like for those workloads. So like a really common example is container workloads trying to run as the root user. Now we consider that a misconfigured workload, because if someone can access it, then they've got a lot more flexibility in what they can do as an attacker. They might be able to try and access.
And I think today's native Kubernetes is so much way easier to catch this, right? Compared to say running an application on a VM as root, right? It's not that straightforward, right? And there's a framework today on Kubernetes to do this today.
Yeah, so maybe in here I can share regarding just one of the Gather report, perhaps. Yeah. Because can I share the screen?
We can, because I want to, because that's what I was going to. Franky, this is perfect. Because I want to know. So how do you talk to the customers about it, right? So we're sitting here and we're doing this, and you're saying you should do this and you can do that. I want to see this. So yeah, Franky, please give us some knowledge here.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, can you see my full screen here?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Actually, this is one of the Gather report talking about the 10 supply chain vulnerabilities. When we talk to customer regarding security, we'll leverage this as one of the baseline to start the conversation. Just forget about the number. You try to derive the security into 3 parts from Gather perspective, because Gather predicts that, similar like a reporter, by 2025, 45% of organization would experience security supply chain attack. Right, our report even earlier, right? Already happened now. Okay, for this year, we try to derive the security into 3 parts here, meaning that the first part is quite familiar. It's talking about the pipeline security. So that's the reason we have DevSecOps in here in the conversation. So we can the build process and then the deployment process in here. So we can see number 1 to 5 are the vulnerabilities related to supply chain that may happen in that area. In the middle part, for the light blue one, is talking about the core security, or we call it platform security. Just the product security is not enough. You still make sure that the platform is secure. You have the network policy. You should have the role-based access control, and you also have the service mesh, for example, is one part of it. And you can see is the right-hand side is the very beginning to talk about. Right now, most customers interested, most area is talking about the parameter, or we call it the WAAP, the web application and API protection kind of thing. So we have this kind of quite broad of spectrum talking about this. And underneath you can see the security controls, right? For the DevSecOps, you can see a lot of the security tools starting from the build or even from the IDE coding process, and then all the way to the for the whole software development supply chain. For the platform one, maybe you're familiar with all the wordings, but just one of them I would like to highlight is talking about the CNAPP, right? You can see in the bottom here. CNAPP is the Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. Actually, it's a integrated set of security and compliance capabilities designed to help secure and protect cloud native applications across multiple environments.
So is that an external thing, or is that just...
Yeah, it's external thing. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's coming. Maybe you can see some of the security vendor, they claim or they say, oh, our portal security portal offering is exactly CNAPP.
Gotcha.
Right. So actually it's combined quite a lot of capabilities. One of these is maybe you definitely might have heard of talking about the CSPM, the Cloud Security Posture Management. Actually is an offering that we are trying to, from a cloud perspective, how we are going to mitigate certain kind of the cloud infrastructure risks, right? And the right-hand side talking about, you can see the WAAP, talking about the API. So a lot of the things is talking about the WAF, the DDoS attack, the bolt mitigation. So maybe I stop in here, just give you, the overview. Actually, we can have that kind of broad conversation for every type of conversation.
Yeah, I mean, to Ming and Shane, I mean, any comments? I mean, it's just new to me. I've never seen this before, and I mean, it's incredible, and it keeps lending me to think about how complex this is.
Definitely, and I think one of the key messages there is, how do you bring these security controls to workflows in a way that it feels transparent while still meeting all those requirements? How do you build signing or kind of image signing into a workflow in a way that feels transparent, or policy as code or SBOM generation, so that doesn't become a developer concern and becomes one of those high friction security controls that's just going to get worked around. I think that's really what I take away.
Yeah, I think a very good point. Because most of the people look about security are just try to avoid attacks. But when you look at the number 9, they were on the break here, it's just like the Kubernetes security report we just showed, misconfiguration. Actually, this is another, big area the customer is really taking care about it.
I think the way I look at this is that, all this is great during day 0 and day 1 to have their policies all, ideally you have all this in place. But what about maintenance, right? What about, maintaining it and making sure that it's up to date? I think there's also a lot of challenges that, our customer face today, and therefore the emphasis on policy as code, on IAC, right, declarative through Kubernetes construct. And that's very important, right? Because, with that, you had it in Git, for instance, you have the full audit trail, you do a pull request to update it, you have GitOps, right, to make the whole sort of patterns or security patterns, if you will, right, to be enforced onto the platform, right? It's no longer someone goes in, do it by hand. That's what we've been doing for VMs. That's what we're doing for bare metal, right? Hardening compliance, do it once, but you never update it anymore. You never go back and check on it anymore, right? And the processes that we have today, I think, is so much more matured, right? To have those, technologies, those capabilities for the customers and for partners, to do it in a very more, effective manner, right? Shane, what are your thoughts on this?
Sorry, I'm just trying to kind of head off a BBC moment with a small child coming into the screen.
So you've got a security leak going on, basically.
I know. It's good fun. Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right as well, Ming. How do we kind of create that kind of continuous security process,
exactly,
so that we're constantly revisiting those controls, we can capture them, we can manage them in a kind of DevSecOps friendly way. And like we mentioned, bring that to platforms in a way that it feels transparent and it doesn't create friction between teams.
Exactly. CI and CD, there's also continuous compliance, right?
So yeah, for here, I would like to jump to one of the, Corey, whenever I talk about the security from Red Hat, actually, we have the 9 categories and then break down to around over 30 of security methods. So you can see all the pipeline process. We have different kind of security that we can incur in the supply chain in here. And it also try to explain why at least the customer in Hong Kong put so much emphasis on the runtime security. Because when you look at the right of the diagram here, you can see all from the operation perspective, the application runtime, all 9 categories, you can see the 9 colors here, already in that kind of, option. When comparing with the shift left, okay, talking about still in IDE, still in coding process, there's still, the comparison is quite, in huge area here. When we also try to talk to the customer. Well, whether if we are trying to scaring you, no, of course no, because when you try to put another one is here, try to reference another. I mean the periodic table. When you try to see security, which is the deep blue color in here in this diagram, you can also find out actually security is just a piece of the ice tip here, right? But you definitely need to have the whole picture whenever you talk about the DevOps, because we have quite a lot of speaker right now talking about whenever I talk about security, actually you need to take care about your DevOps and also your DevSecOps.
Yeah, and what I love about this table is it shows security as part of the natural world of all of this, right? It's just some elements that have to be part of it for it all to work, and they work in tandem with things and that kind of thing. So I really like that. But I find myself overwhelmed, and I'm curious, when you sit down with a customer and, they think they're doing well, and is it hard to educate them? And I know, Ming, you've got some stories around that, and I thought maybe it was an opportunity for you to share a bit about how do you get them to, I think the words you use were relook at security.
Exactly, and I think that is the way how I look at it, and how do we work with teams or these to relook at security, because it's a whole new world for them, and how can we as red hatters, right, help them to relook at the whole new paradigm for security for cloud native world. Right.
So I'll go ahead and put your slides up. But I'd like you to take us through that a little bit, just so we can, so our viewers and such can get a sense of how that might happen, and especially in APAC.
Sure. Let me just quickly walk through the audience with the way how I look at things, and how we help some of customers. This is just an example, right? And because the reality is that a lot of customers today, when they look at Kubernetes, they look at containers. Some of them, yes, and some of them are more mature, but a lot of them are still starting, right? Even though Kubernetes has been around for about 6, 7, 8 years already, right? But some of these organizations are just beginning to, adopt containers, adopt Kubernetes, and security is, as usual, is a important conversations, right? But the thing about security is that the sooner you have that conversation, the better it is, and you should never have that conversation at the end. Just what Shane has talked about earlier is that right before the project goes live, let's do a security audit. Let's look at a VAPT test. Let's look at do you have all this tech before we can actually go live? And whoa, that's a big explosion, right? It's never gonna work. And that's how a lot of these customers today, when they look at it, and the problem with that is that the same old thinking, the same old results, and some of these customers are beginning to realize that, holy cow, right? The current processes that I have, whether it's AV, whether it's VM based solution, the way how container work is never going to be the same, right? I mean, one of the most common question, I think, Franky, Shane, you probably are aware, is that, should I have an antivirus there? Should I run an antivirus in my container? Should it be a sidecar? How do I do that, right? Because on my VM, which runs a monolithic applications, it has an antivirus, it has an EDR, it has whatever technologies that all the 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 agents that they put on the VM, right, to secure that VM. But in the container world, right, it's a process, it's a way to package the software, it's a way different, right? And some of these customers that I work with, they start to realize that, holy cow, right? The old way of, if I stick on the old way, right, I'm going to get the same results, right? I'm going to just fall back to my old tools and technologies to use. Is my security going to be better? Probably not, right? Is it going to be the right way? Probably not, right? So that's the way how some of these customers are looking at this, looking at how they should really think of the box, right? And unfortunately, one of my big customers today is really thinking of the box, meaning that they're going to throw or relook at all the existing processes, relook at this from an outside in perspective, right? Outside in and inside out, right? To look at their cyber policies. And the next slide is going to be interesting, right? Because from a security perspective, right, they all tend to look at that checklist of theirs. Everything needs to be checked. Everything needs to be compliant before it actually goes live, right? But the way how we look at this problem, right, even from a Red Hat perspective, just like CVEs, right, is never going to be zero risk at all. But then how do you become more of a manageable risk or managed risk, perspective, right? Because a lot of CVEs, a lot of vulnerabilities, it's going to happen every day. You're going to have like 100 CVEs every week, right? But what are the most important CVEs that is going to be critical to you, right? What is the most impactful to you? And how do you then look at it from a managed risk perspective instead of zero risk? Because to do patching, to do compliance, to do it on an every other day basis, it's just not going to be sustainable, right? People are just tired, to do patching because it just takes, too long to patch, right? And it just comes and go, right? It's every other month, every other week, you got to do that exercise, right? Are you going to be targeting for, zero CVs? Well, that's not real, right? And then how a technology like the CV scanning tools for containers, how do you then have a sort of acceptable profile to say that this is something that is manageable to us, this is something that it's that we can accept it, right? And we can actually go through the pipeline without any concerns at all, right? Because the reality is that you're going to get CVs every other day, and then how do you then manage such a risk, right? Because the next slide is going to be important, right? And the next slide is how do you then work with the cybersecurity? How is the customer actually relooking at the security policy? Because they sort of realize that earlier I talked about managing risk, right? Because how then cyber from a security team perspective is actually an enabler, right? Because a lot of times when you work with customers, right, I'm sure Franky and Shane, can totally agree with me is that cyber security team, all our customers says that they are a blocker, right? And, they all must say yes, 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 right? This is what cyber team say so, and therefore we must follow exactly, right? They have that huge, checklist again, right? That we must comply, right? And for this customer perspective, they are relooking it, and it's not just the platform team, not just the infra team. It's actually the cybersecurity team that says that they need to relook at the policies, because then how do they help the organizations adopt newer technology like containers? Because they know that their current existing processes and tools are not relevant anymore. Yeah, some of them still are, yes, granted, but how do they relook at this whole new paradigm, which a lot of times they're not familiar with, especially like things like container security. Now, how does a security engineer or cybersecurity person look at container security, right? I'm actually totally amazed by this customer, because the cybersecurity guy is actually installing OpenShift by himself, right? He's actually installing OpenShift, looking at Podman, looking at containers, looking at SCC, and looking at how does the technology actually work to protect and to have the guardrails, right, for the platform, right? And that's just amazing, right? Because we often say that security people are a bunch of paper people, right? A bunch of paper folks, right?
Yeah.
Who doesn't understand about the technology, right? But in this case, the customer and in this team, they're very open, right? They were actually looking at the technology underneath the hood to look at, oh, actually, this is what network policy is doing, this is what Cryo is doing, this is what IC Linux is doing, right? And this is something that I can be sure that it will manage my security risk for me, and this is acceptable to me, right? And that's something that they are very well advanced. That's that because they are they do have deep engineering skill sets,
Yeah,
right?
and I like what you're saying, that they're not, he's installing OpenShift. He's seeing his role in it. He's not an isolated part and says, well, they put in some OpenShift and I have to do this. He's customers taking ownership of not his own ownership, being part of the whole thing, realizing it's a bigger thing than his team. It's not his job to drop gates. It's his job to be part of it.
Exactly, and that is where this security team is actually part of the new central team that the organization is actually forming today, right? It's not somebody that you have to go through the security gates, or to go through that checklist, but they're actually part of the whole new central team that this organization is forming, and that's the difference, right? And that's the difference in here, right? Because once the security team is part of, that central team, the conversation around security will then, largely revolve around what the team is doing on a day-to-day basis, right? It's not going to be an afterthought, right? It's not going to be a paper exercise. He's going to be involved in all the decision making, right? Whether we should use network policies, should we do root containers, should we do emission controller, right, to better protect that platform, right? And it's just a wonderful experience, right, to work with this organization, because they are definitely relooking at this from totally a new, different angle than most of our customers are today.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, it makes sense. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I would like to add on just a very quick one. Is I totally agree with Li Ming, right? In certain extent, the reality I think hearing from the customer is it's still not going in that way, right? Because that maybe due to the function and features, the roles and responsibility, they're still working in silo. Still, doesn't have a cohesive way to deliver security first kind of strategy. So they try to identify something that can we have a dashboard like green light signal? You just tell me which are the which are the red ones, and then provide the link for me. Better you can help me to automate the patches if there's any, and then to fix the problem. Try not to ask me what is open source security and what is the security, vulnerability management and risk analysis kind of thing. So I think there's something that we are still keep on trying, educating in the field to try the customer understand. Actually, this is not that simple.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, that's very valuable. Cool. Have you got more, Li Ming, or you?
I think probably just one more last slide, right? And the way they look at it, I'll just give an example, right? Doing the right way, right? And I think we talk a lot about, and Franky touched base on that earlier, right? How do we use tools and technology, right, instead of the manual way, right? Things like IAC, network as code, security as code, configuration as code, policy as code, right? To adopt the right technology for the right purpose, right? Because at the end of the day, how do you then secure that platform, right? The runtime, and all about your application, but also integrating to the CI/CD pipeline, right? Because ultimately you want transparency, right? The more transparent you are, instead of a black box, so that developers get instant feedback to what's the issue, right? Maybe you didn't meet the minimum gate, or you're not using the right say UBI images, or probably you are accidentally using a root container, things like that, right? Active feedback, right, to the developers so that they can proactively make that change. We talk about shift left. Audibility is critical, right? Because a lot of organizations today, the way how they look at the logs, right? They need to be audited. They need to be transparent to make sure that whatever changes that they've done, whether it's to the code, whether it's to the policies, there's traceability. There's also accountability, right? But most important, and I think also to a lot of organizations today, especially from the government sector, right? The challenges that they face is not about CI. It's actually about CD, right? Because of different networks, right? Different air gap scenarios, right? In the ideal world, you would have CI, to the development, CD to the development, right? And CD to the production once the release has been approved, right? But still a lot of organizations today, their challenge is, air gap, disconnected environments, two different networks, you don't have that connectivity, right? And that is still probably a lot of problems, for our, existing customers today, is that how to then they achieve the true CI/CD, right? Even to the production environments. I'm not sure whether Franky or Shane has any thoughts on this.
I think this is actually a really good kind of time to look more closely at some of those kind of as code workflows. How do you manage security policy as code and infrastructure as code, and make that consistent across those environments? And I think that's where organizations are really looking to adopt those workflows, is how it brings consistency, but also transparency. If I can get developers feeding back, into that kind of security policy and bringing best practices into that, then we can start to create some of those feedback loops from kind of development into production. And I think that's really important.
Exactly, right? Because even the more open it is, I mean, it's all about the net promoter score of developers, right? The more happy they are, they're better to adopt the platform. And
it's interesting because what we basically have going on here now is, we're seeing how it's evolved, how we've got this old way of working. We know now that we need to bring it into an actual, kind of cohesive way of working, and make it as, if we do it as code, then that's very much what they do every day. So it's kind of, for someone like myself who's, trying to get my head around security and these concepts you're talking about, and all these different groups and organizations and how it needs to come together, I'm starting to see it, right? It's actually making sense. I'm moving along that pipeline. I'm starting to understand it.
Yeah, it's reassuring to see, like Ming mentioned, that a lot of our customers are now, getting their hands dirty. They understand everything as a code, is the way to go. I find it, really interesting that, they are going down that path. I know Shane has a demo for us, and it's, it brings it back when you see things visually. So I'd really like, to pass this on to Shane to get us through this demo.
Yes, indeed. So there it is. Yeah. So exactly. We've talked the talk. Let's walk the walk a little bit and see what all this really looks like.
Awesome. And I think we saw this called out a few times in the different sessions today. It was, how do we approach policy as code? So what I want to show is a workflow of how I can store those security policies in, say, a Git repository, and then create this kind of automated workflow to apply those across different platforms and services. So the way I'm going to do that specifically, I'm going to store all of my security policy as JSON objects inside a Git repository. Every time I make a change, I'm going to kick off some kind of GitHub actions to verify that automation, and then make a RESTful API call to my automation platform. That's going to then orchestrate all of those changes to security policy inside my security platform, Red Hat Advanced Cluster Security for Kubernetes. So this is Advanced Cluster Security for Kubernetes, or ACS, and it comes with a number of these security policies. So these apply across the build, deploy, and runtime lifecycle for container workloads. So that means I can apply policies that apply to, say, CI/CD pipelines, or I can apply policies to new deployments to a cloud-native platform, or I can apply these into the runtime lifecycle. So if we want to look, say, for containers that are spawning shells, or other kinds of anomalous activity, we can look at those kind of policies. Now, specifically, the one I want to look at today is this curl in image policy. So this policy is going to alert me when a container has the curl binary present. So I think this is really important, because curl is a really useful tool to have as a kind of a container attacker. It means you can pull down new capabilities, you can probe services, you can try and move laterally through in the network. It's really helpful to have curl available. So we want to flag that and say, this workload has curl present, we want to block that. And currently this policy is disabled. So what I want to do is enable that using this policy as code workflow. So what I've got is all of my policies stored inside, or I've pulled down kind of a JSON representation of those policies. Now this is that same curl in image policy now represented as code in my repository. So what I'm going to do to enable it is simply change this disabled flag to false. I'm going to save that file, and I'm going to commit it into my repository. So we'll just call this something like enable curl in image policy. So I'm going to commit up that change. And when I make that change, it's going to kick off now my GitHub actions to start making those changes. So what we're going to do first is we're going to run an Ansible lint across that automation that I've created, just to see whether there's any changes or maybe catch any mistakes in that automation workflow. Once that completes, it's going to make a RESTful API call to my automation platform. So in this case, I've got my Ansible automation platform that's going to actually orchestrate all of those policy as code changes. And once that RESTful API call kicks off, I'm going to start to see a new set of playbooks start to kick off. So first, we're going to pull down the latest copy of my security policies. So you can see that source control update is running. Now, once that completes, it's going to kick off my automation to update all of those security policies. So you can see my policy as code workflow kicking off, and that's going to make all of those changes and essentially create that consistency with what's in my Git repository is reflected inside my security platform. So you can start to see all of those policies now being applied to my platform. Now, once that completes, what I'm going to see is that curl image policy switches from disabled, and I should see that it's now enabled, and it reflects what's inside my repository. So the idea here is that now I can start to create new policies using this policy as code approach. I can bring developers into that workflow, and we can start to look at, picking apart some of those policies and looking at how we want to improve that security posture. And we can do this in a way that's transparent for development teams. It's really simple to audit, and it helps me create that consistency across hybrid cloud environments.
And it's very native for those development teams, right? I know we've said it over and over, but it's as code, right? We're not asking them to do something else. We're just saying, do what you do and get the same, get that advantage.
Exactly. And kind of managing that almost as a software development workflow, making those changes as code, pushing that up, kicking off those GitHub actions, and then simply orchestrating, in this case, all those changes to the security platform. So I think that's kind of one approach I've found works for these kind of policy as code approaches. And you could potentially take that to other kind of security platforms if you wanted to look at, applying those changes across kind of cloud resources or other security platforms. You can start to take that same policy as code approach now.
Yeah, and it's nice to see the different pieces of, they're Red Hat products, but the different softwares working together. You hopped into Ansible, you're back into ACS. It makes a difference, right? If we can have that seamless integration with the tooling, it's as you talk about, the friction is not there, right? It makes life easier for people to have that consistency across things.
Yeah, exactly. And creates that transparency. I don't need to now create access controls into different security platforms just so developers can see the policy that's enforced. We can just, provide them a repository and say, well, here's the current policy that's being enforced across all of these different workloads, and seek feedback into that as well, I think is really important.
Yeah, and this is across clouds, right? You mentioned that, but this could be anywhere, right? We're getting the same view. That's the power of OpenShift. But these tools, the security process isn't specific a way of working per cloud or per environment. It's not one way for on-premises and a different way for AWS. We can start to run all this in transparently, right, in a cleaner way, so that people can, developers and teams can work across all of this.
Yeah, 100%. And you can probably see it's getting dark where I am, and my face is getting more illuminated from the monitor. But definitely, being able to have that kind of central policy definition and then push that out across different platforms, whether that's on premises, whether it's cloud, whether it might be out at the edge, being able to have that kind of centralized view and being able to and see what's not only what those controls are, but also how they're being implemented. Yeah. And that might be captured in, say, 3 different spreadsheets inside an organization at the moment. But I think using this policy as code approach, we can start to capture that in a single repository.
Yeah. This is excellent. So we've come to the top of the hour. We're a little over, but I do want to give each of you a chance to kind of wrap it up. It's been really helpful for someone like myself as I, kind of get introduced to this process and to really hear that story of how, the industry is, what the world's like, and then how we have talked to our customers about it, and just how we talk to security professionals about it and that kind of thing. So why don't we just quickly go, as they say on ESPN, round the horn, and just quickly just kind of sum up maybe a bit about how this is hitting your region. We'll start with you, Franky, just because you're at the top of my screen for whatever reason. Just some final words on that.
Yeah, I think a quick one is just like I'm painting a normal journey is we should paint the big picture, but we should start small. And then the first come is always not the technology first. We first need to have the people buy in. Then we look at the existing process and then review it to see whether we can have a better one with the with different party agreed. Then we can start with the technology, just like, for example, like the shift left, like the policy as code, and then automation in security, right? Then last but not least, maybe the most important is talking about the governance. Right, we need to because policy as code is always we're talking about the definition, like codifying the governance and compliance rules. So that's the reason we also need to automate it.
Yeah, it all has to get to that point, doesn't it? Again, coming back to our opening themes, it has to be consistent like that. Ming, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is really when you look at customers, right? And along what Franky has already mentioned, right? And how do we start small, right? How do we then relook at this problem statement, right? Because if the customer is not willing to do so, I think then it's going to be very challenging, right? And then how we as an organization, right, as Red Hatters, right, come in and look and talk to the customers, and help them to realize that, container security is going to be a little bit different, but come in with an open mindset, right? I'm trying to learn, what are the better ways to secure it, right? And policy as code and everything as codification. And that's actually important, right? Along the team of automation, along the team of Ansible, where, everything as code, right? Everything as a service, right? That totally then makes sense for customers. But I can be sure that, it's still a long journey, right? But I do see customers are beginning to slowly adopt, some of the better processes, some of the better ways to, secure their container platform today.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Shane, I'll give you the final word from the panel there.
Yeah, I really, really like where cloud native security is going, and starting to look more at kind of making this feel like just a part of the platform, and something that's kind of almost transparent to developers. And I think if we can focus more on those kind of low friction, high impact security processes, that's going to have a lot of benefits for organization. It's going to make it easier to move code into production in a more secure way. And it's going to avoid, I think, some of those bad habits we've seen creeping in, like moving security or backloading security on the end of a project and having a massive checklist, and creating those project delays that I think you called out before, and being able to call out those critical CVEs, focusing more on those and less on trying to be zero CVE right at the end of a project, which I don't think ever works. So I really like where it's headed. I like focusing on those low friction, high impact controls, and kind of making this almost transparent to platform users.
And I think you said an important thing, right? Cloud native security. These are cloud native systems. They need cloud native security. We can't be applying old fashioned models to it. Just like with, we need that for everything in the cloud native world. And it's so cool to see how this is kind of moving ahead, and how deeply integrated we are at Red Hat with the processes and the education of our customers, as well as the engineering and the code behind it. And I just love that you were able to kind of show us all those elements, from the hands-on to the theory to the reasoning. It's really helpful. I mean, Dev, we did it again. We got a great show. We did a ton of info. I'm really
Absolutely.
pleased.
I really enjoyed this particular show. We started it with looking at all the vulnerabilities that we start to see in all different regions. Everyone gave their perspectives, and then we kind of moved towards how our customers are thinking about it. How are we enabling them? And this is what I learned from all of this. Like it takes a village to bring this on board, and it was really reassuring to see some of our customers really getting hands on. And from a security point of view, not thinking of it as a checklist, but really something that is simplified. And Shane really showed that in action, right? How easy it is. It's everything as a code and where it is headed. So all in all, really helpful. And thanks to all of you to come on the show and educate us. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Over to you, August.
That's great. So, and if you want more, I have to remind everyone the Red Hat Summit is coming up in America in May. It's in a couple of weeks. If you're not lucky enough, like myself, to be there, I'm not going to be there. I'm the unlucky one. I'll be here. You can actually register for some sessions to be made available if you head over to the Summit page and check it out. So you can get more of these great insights from more Red Hat experts, which is really cool. Of course, we have many in our own region as well, so definitely in our own time zone. Additionally, we're going to keep going with the Kopi Hour. So we've got a bunch of other streaming shows. We've got the GitOps Hour. We've got Ask an OpenShift Admin. Check out the streaming calendar. Much of it is in a non-APAC friendly time, but it's all recorded and it's all there for you to review, and you can get in touch with folks and everything. So that pretty much brings it to an end. I'm really, really pleased to have had Franky, Ming, and Shane on the show and taking us through everything. It's been a wonderful show. If you have any final words, now's the time. But if not, I'm happy to wrap it up. Cool. I just wanted to make sure, because I mean, I could sit here for another hour and chat. But as you said, Shane, it's getting dark where we are. Your little one's probably just knocking at that door. So let's go ahead and finish it off. So thank you everyone again for attending, and we'll catch you next time on the Kopi Hour.
All right.
See ya.
Thanks,
Thank
Marcus. Thanks,
you.
Sarah. See you.